Delighted that this week we're going to be joined by Izzy Romilly, who's a volunteer with London Cycle Campaign, and Izzy's going to be talking about the Women's Freedom Campaign, which you might have seen the ride this weekend, but there's a lot more to it than just that. We're also going to be joined this week again by our regular speaker, Ranty Highwayman, who's going to talk about cycle traffic signals. So if you've got any views on cycle traffic signals, you've joined the right session. And we'll kick off as usual with our little news roundup. So let's get into that now. And before we go to Izzy to open up this week's talk, let's see who's got any news to share from around the UK. Over to you guys. Hi, Ruth.
Hello, everybody. Well, lots of news really, but last night was the Hammersmith and Fulham cabinet meeting about their clean air neighbourhoods, and it was when they were going to vote on whether they were going to keep it permanent or not. It was interesting. There were 7 people against who were allowed to speak and 4 people for. So Steve Cowan is the leader of Hammersmith and Fulham Council. It's the most complicated scheme in the world, which is really induced demand for parking, because anybody who goes to a shop in the area is given a pad that they can get free parking. They have to arrange it before, but the shops are all, if they're listed and registered, then they are allowed to give their customers free parking. Leo is going to do his Twitter feed because he was there. But it was just extraordinary because the 7 people who were against, including someone called David Tarsh, who was a member of the ABD, and I've forgotten what that stands for, but also used to work for Exxon and Mobil. He's against everything, and Steve Cowan rather played with him. All the people who were against, and this is a lesson for all of us about 4, were anecdotal. Everything was anecdotal. It smells worse. There appears to be more congestion. It feels as if there's more pollution. My customers say they can't arrive on time. But all the pros, the 4 people who spoke pro the scheme, were absolutely succinct, clear, detailed, real information that was fantastic. And at the end, the cabinet voted, and they have voted to keep the scheme, which is marvellous, but and very exciting because so much is going wrong in West London, apart from Hounslow. But still, it just kind of gives free parking, so it does induce more people to park rather than trying to ban the parking. But do read Leo's thread because he did an excellent thread on it. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth. Transport initiatives. I think that might be you, Mark. Oh, you're on mute, Mark.
On my phone. I'm on my way back from Bournemouth, and the news is we're doing a big cycle parking study for BCP. So if anyone's from the area, I don't know if Beth's on the call, but we didn't manage to meet up with her yesterday. But I actually visited Keyhole Bridge, which is quite interesting. So I've heard so much about it. So visiting it is. But the news is that they're looking at cycle parking in a whole-scale way. So that's good news. That's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. Good news for cycle parking in, where did you say?
BCP, Bournemouth, Christchurch and Paul. Sorry, it's too long to say the whole name.
I know, but we
had Andy Hadley here in the past, didn't we, as councillor of the area?
Yeah. There we go. Right, over to you, Ben, in Bedford.
Yes, this is more a national matter. The government consultation launched on Thursday last week, proposing to increase the maximum power output for e-cycles and also to make permissible throttle only control for e-cycles. And certainly with my work hat on, I'm opposing that because it looks like it's being driven by the logistics industry who want to use cycle infrastructure for moving their goods around rather than anyone within the active travel community. And from what we can see, the evidence within the consultation document is either anecdotal or alternatively refers to the current situation rather than being relevant to what they're proposing.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, I think there's definitely different views on that consultation. Definitely hear yours, and let's hear from Graham and then Robin.
Hi, this is really quite brief. I've been attending a planning inquiry into the HIF1 road scheme for Didcot, which is about £300 million and growing. In 2018, they put a DMRB project across the top of Didcot going up to Culham. In cycling, we complained bitterly that there was no cycling facilities. Now in 2022, they added cycling facilities that were on the whole respectable, not bad, but they still included quite big deviations to cross the arms of roundabouts. And the point I'm making, I suppose, is in the planning inquiry, they're pushing alternative transport is really good, and this is without any judgment of where people might want to come from and go to. It's for 30,000 homes, and the county transport planner said there's no need to conform to the county's traffic reduction targets of something like 30% by 5 years, because this is a rural scheme. So adding 30,000 homes to Didcot, which has already had about 20 or 30,000 added in the last 10 years, it's still a rural project. I'd just like to remind colleagues that DMRB is alive and well, and the MPPF that says use the Model Design Code, use the National Design Code, do not do anything that's related to Design Bulletin 32, because it was withdrawn in 2007, seems to have escaped huge numbers of people, full stop.
Sounds like you've got a bit of a beast on your hands there, Graham. And a reminder, if you use an acronym, which you might have to do, post in the chat what it means, because not everyone's up to speed with them all. Robin, and I can't tell you what those meant, so you'll have to, Graham. Over to you, Robin.
Yes, we've got a battle royale on there. So meanwhile in Oxford, we had Carlos Moreno come to speak about 15-minute cities, and a few people from this group fans came to see him talk. I have to say his talk, which is available on YouTube, if you look under the Oxford University Transport Studies unit, it was a bit long and rambling, but what I took away from it, apart from what we all know about 15-minute cities, was there was a real focus. Don't worry about, he essentially said, don't worry about the 15 minutes, that's not important, it's about the proximity and the real focus on localizing skills and the economy. Think of it as a hyper-local economy was one of the points he put home. There were a few kind of antis there. One of them asked a question which started off with a bit of COVID misinformation, disinformation, and then essentially said, well, why if you build the 15-minute cities, can you do that? Can you really hope to do that when there's no investment for the facilities? But actually in Oxford, we're proving that wrong, because one of them, there's investment going into Blackbird Leeds on the east of Oxford, which will create new facilities, which I must stick out on social media to prove the point at some time. There we go. Meanwhile, investment is actually going in for the traffic filters. The electrics are being laid this week for the cameras for the traffic filters. Let's all hope they don't get vandalised.
Thanks, Robin. Over to Tom, who's got a lovely waterfront scene behind him. I don't know where that is, Tom.
Sorry, excuse me. I'm in Tynemouth, so hence the backdrop, just outside Newcastle. And I suppose just piping up really, because we've got a very large Active Travel England funded scheme under construction at the moment here, kind of the first phase of what will eventually be kind of 12 million quid's worth of seafront cycleway. And in many ways it's going to be great, but I think one of the lessons perhaps from people dealing with similar stuff elsewhere, which is kind of further down the pipeline, is that you can't really assume that because there's this kind of Active Travel England involvement and all these inspectors milling about, that necessarily you should take the foot off the gas if you're campaigning for better stuff locally. I think Active Travel England are dealing with an awful lot all over the country, the quality of which is often, I'm assuming actually is often a lot worse than what we're seeing going in here. So, there's a limited amount of time available to kind of push and help and control the council that I'm dealing with. And there's elements of this scheme which are frankly not great. There's elements of this scheme which are amazing. But I suppose in a way, just the lesson I think from our end is kind of don't assume it's going to be great just because you've got this bureaucracy in place now. Keep the pressure up, particularly on detailing and junctions.
Good feedback, Tom. And thank you from that lovely sea view there. Over to you, Adam. I don't think you've got a sea view in Somerset.
No, I've had to pull down the blinds because it's the sunset is beautiful. Anyway, I just wanted to, as people might be aware, it may have been mentioned before, there's the permitted housing use development that's going on at the moment, consultation. They're lumping bin and bike stores in the same thing and saying that the store can be 2 meters wide, 1 meter deep, and 1.5 meters high. The cycle design vehicle, which was first published in IAN 195/95, that I believe is a 2.4 meter long cycle, 1.2 meters wide, so it won't fit. And even some of the standard sort of bike stores you get out there, which are usually 7 foot by 4 foot, which is the Asgard standard sort of bike store, it technically is too big. So it's basically not fit for purpose, and potentially is quite problematic in terms of adapted cycles and storage of cargo bikes. So that probably needs focus. I'll put the link in the chat, but it is definitely something you need to be aware of.
Thanks, Adam. And Ben has posted that the Wheels for Wellbeing will be doing a response on permitted development, so that sounds good. Let's hear now from Bob. And if anyone's got any more news, we've got time for probably one more after that. Otherwise, we'll go to Izzy for our main talk.
Yeah, super quick. I just wanted to back up Adam's thing. That's the main thing I was going to talk about. This is really, really important because secure and convenient home parking is really important. And the issue about disabilities things is tremendously important. Do look at the consultation. Do see what Wheels for Wellbeing are saying. And the second thing I wanted to mention was about the consultation about increasing the power of e-bikes, which people have been going to long technical discussions on social media. I go along with the Cycling UK response, which I think you should look at. But that first one is really important for us. Thanks.
Thanks, Bob. If you could post that response in the chat, that'd be useful. So if we don't have any other news, there's one more thing I was going to mention. I think someone mentioned it in the chat that the Sustrans's walking and cycling index is out today, and they do various different regional ones. And so depending on where you are, there'll be one more local to you. So I'm in Manchester, and we've got a Greater Manchester Walking and Cycling Index that Sustrans produce. It used to be called Bike Life, but they changed it a couple of years ago. Comes out every 2 years. So that's always full of interesting data. One of the interesting lines that I picked up locally was that actually it's been a really big increase, according to the survey, which is done on a kind of base of about 1,000 people selected to be representative is a really big increase in students cycling, which I don't know, I wondered if that was to do with cost of living, but you know, something really large, like, you know, 15-20% or something. So if anyone's got any theories on what that increase, and whether that increase was reflected in the other SOSTRANS walking and cycling indexes across the country, that would be quite interesting, just in that student demographic. Right, okay. Now, over to you, Izzy. The way Izzy and I are going to do this is that I'm going to share Izzy's slides and Izzy's going to do the talking. So let's give it a go. So I'll put myself on mute, you share the slides, Izzy, and just give me a moment to get them up.
Cool, thanks, Claire. Cool, well, while Claire's getting the slides, I'll just maybe say a little bit of background about the Women's Network. So I'm Izzy, I'm a volunteer at the London Cycling Campaign. I'm one of the co-organisers of LCC's Women's Network. So LCC's Women's Network is a partnership between the London Cycling Campaign, Joy Riders and LBK, Londra Bisiklet Kulübü, who are a community cycling group in London. The Women's Network was founded in late 2022, early 2023, and we had a ride last year for International Women's Day. So we just had our second one a couple of days ago, and we had 1,000 people sign up for that first ride last year. And we, you know, it really felt like that campaign kind of hit a nerve, and like the momentum around it just kind of ballooned completely out of what, you know, we expected. And so it kind of became the focus for more campaigning, and a campaign formed around 3 asks for women. And in the kind of follow-up to that ride, we sent out a survey to everyone who had signed up, because we wanted to find out more about, you know, whether our campaign asks that we had designed were the right ones, like what were we missing. So we wanted to kind of hear directly from women who cycle in London about what the barriers are. So that's how all of this has come about. Claire, can we have the next slide, please? Thank you. So there's now well over 1 million cycle trips a day in London, but we know that they're not being taken equally. And this is in comparison to some other cities in Europe where women actually do more than half of journeys by bike. So we basically wanted to know, why is it less than 1 in 3 cycle trips that are taken by women in London? And we know that it's not just about gender as well. There's other inequalities and barriers for other specific groups. But for the purposes of this survey, we were looking at gender. Next slide, please. So our first finding was just about how widespread like verbal abuse and aggression towards women on bikes is. So this is kind of nearly like a universal experience for women on bikes in London. 9 out of 10 said that they had experienced abuse and aggression, and nearly 2/3 said that that happened at least once a month. Next slide, please. Thanks. So in terms of the verbal abuse that women were talking about, firstly, when we were reading through, and we had about like 800 free text responses of women telling us, you know, stories about the things that had happened to them while cycling around London. And we were really struck by this theme that came up again and again, and was the most common type of abuse that people mentioned. And it was the idea of like, get out of my way, get off the road, like you shouldn't be here. And it really felt like the kind of message was that women on bikes are not seen as legitimate road users. They're seen as a nuisance, and, you know, a kind of a problem to some other road users. And that was particularly in reaction to women talking about situations where they were in primary positions, so in the middle of a lane and taking up space. And another thing to say about that verbal abuse is that it was often a platform for other kinds of abuse as well, so other kinds of bigotry. So obviously gendered slurs were, you know, came up a lot, but also racial slurs, ageism. There was, you know, quite a lot of stories from parents who had been, you know, verbally abused while cycling with their children. So it felt like these kind of situations on the road then became like a platform for the kind of expression of like lots of other things. Obviously misogyny was the one that came up most in this survey. Next slide, please. Thanks, Claire. So there was very much a theme of like intimidating women on the road, and not just verbally, but actually extending to driving behaviour as well. So 93% of people who answered the survey said that drivers had deliberately used their vehicles to intimidate them. And so that was in a range of ways. Sometimes it was like punishment passing. So, you know, overtaking women really closely after they had themselves like filtered through traffic. Sometimes it was stopping suddenly in front of them to like, in order to, you know, verbally abuse them. And there are a surprising number of stories about drivers deliberately driving into women who were waiting at bike boxes. Like, you know, nudging is not the right word, but that's how women described it. Drivers like nudging them to push them out of the way at bike boxes. So it's not just a like social, but also a physical threat as well. Next slide, please. Thanks. So the effect of that, all of those incidents was so kind of threatening and so common that 1 in 5 people who answered our survey told us that they had stopped cycling for a while or permanently as a result. And bear in mind that this sample of 1,000 people was skewed towards women who already cycle in London and were kind of, you know, following London Cycling Campaign on social media and so on, or had come to the ride. So these were kind of mostly people who were already cycling and were like continuing to do so. So I think it's not just about the effect on people cycling, but it's also about the missed opportunities of other people who could be cycling and what these responses would be had the, you know, we sampled a broader range of people who maybe aren't regular cyclists. And that extended to interactions with the police as well. So 25 respondents spontaneously told us about stories involving the police, and they were mostly, you know, generally there was really poor trust in the police. And that was from the point of view of, you know, women either deciding not to report something because they didn't, you know, they weren't confident it would be followed up, or about reporting something and there being no follow-up at all, and only 2 reported like positive follow-up action. Next slide, please. So yeah, it's really important to say that obviously it's not just women who face these kind of experiences. Probably anyone who's cycled anywhere has you know, had their fair share of like aggression and abuse. But there are some studies that show that it's potentially more women are more likely to be targeted. And I think there's also that added effect of like specifically gendered abuse and also, you know, sexual harassment as well. Next slide, please. Thanks, Claire. Yeah, though, I mean, there was a huge response in terms of like latent demand, and again, the importance of infrastructure that just comes up again and again. So 90% of people cycling told us that they would either start to cycle or cycle more if they had better infrastructure for their journeys, and that was particularly around local journeys. Next slide, please. So the next finding was that many women told us that they avoid isolated or unlit cycle routes like parks or tow paths. And that was to do with feeling unsafe in environments that are dark, that are unlit or isolated. And really shockingly, but again, bearing in mind this is regular cyclists mostly, 1 in 3 women told us that they stopped cycling after dark or in winter due to a lack of safe routes. Next slide, please. And that leads to all of these situations where, yeah, more than half of women told us that they have to choose on their journeys. They make choices between like a main road with loads of heavy traffic where there's no separated cycle infrastructure, where they'll be cycling with buses and taxis and so on, or cycling through like an isolated dark park where they also don't feel unsafe for other reasons. Next slide, please. Thanks. So there were quite a lot of comments as well about better local cycle networks. So we know there's been, you know, loads of progress in London in terms of like building big radial routes in and out of central London. But something I might come back to later is the importance of local networks that will particularly benefit women. So 86% said that half or more of their journeys were local. And again, I think the potential for kind of modal shift within local journeys, it was huge, and that was definitely validated in the survey. Next slide, please. Yeah, and just again, only 15% told us that they had that their kind of local London borough had provided a local cycle network that meets their needs. Next slide, please. Thanks. And yeah, lastly, this isn't just about women's freedom to get around safely, but it's also about the impact on other people around them. So more than a third of women with children said that their children never cycle, even if they're accompanied and even on local journeys. So it's not just about women's freedom, but also about children's freedom. Next slide, please. So yeah, as I mentioned earlier, our campaign is structured around 3 asks, which are on physical safety, social safety, and local networks. And generally, the survey validated those asks. So we asked women, do you agree with our asks, and which ones are the most important to you? And 1/3 of people told us that all of our asks were equally important to them, and then 1/3 told us that our ask on physical safety, i.e. physically separated cycling infrastructure, was the most important one for them. So next slide, please. So yeah, women overwhelmingly told us that they prefer protected infrastructure. We know that fears about personal safety particularly impact women. Mixing with traffic is a massive deterrent for cycling. And again, yeah, this was by far our most popular ask. And so our ask is, yeah, safe, high quality cycling infrastructure across London, which is accessible to all kinds of bikes, 24/7 and all year round. Next slide, please. Thanks, Claire. And our second one is on social safety. So that's feeling safe, with other people, safe from other people's behaviour, not feeling threatened. And there's quite a lot to say about this one. So that includes, serious action on the kind of verbal abuse, the aggression, using vehicles to intimidate people, but also looking at, the qualifications for cycle routes and not designing cycle routes that rely on, unlit, paths through parks and those kind of areas where a lot of people told us they feel unsafe. Next slide, please. Thanks, Claire. And the last one is about local cycle networks. So again, there's been loads of amazing work in London to do kind of great major protected cycleways in and out of central London, which have been really successful, but they are mostly used by men. And we know that women are more likely to take local trips, more likely to trip train, more likely to be traveling with kids, so doing 4 times the school run distance that men typically do. And again, that's having an impact on children's freedom as well. And so when we say local cycle networks, that's, things like local, looking at the kind of destinations in the local area, thinking about secure cycle parking at home and outside of the home, wayfinding, all of those kinds of things, and quiet, low traffic routes as well. So I think there's loads and loads of different forms that this ask could take, but it basically means that we just want to see boroughs in London do much better to design local areas so that they're really friendly to cycling, I think, which will often make them friendlier to walking as well. Next slide, please. Thanks, Claire. So yeah, there were lots of other barriers that people told us about that weren't covered in our 3 asks. A quick run through of some of those are the lack of cycle facilities at work and, feeling the pressure to kind of present professionally and, not having somewhere to get changed and all those kinds of things. There was there were quite a lot of comments about the behaviour of other cyclists and actually feeling, close past and so on from kind of speedy, often male cyclists. There were comments about, quite a lot about potholes, confidence with bike maintenance. There were quite a lot of issues that people raised, but ultimately the 3 asks that we are campaigning for are physical safety, social safety, and local networks. Thank you so much. And just one last thing to add as well is that I think there's quite a lot of people on this call who are from either the Women's Network organising group or the wider network. So if any of them want to come in and add anything or contribute to the Q&A or anything, please do. Thank you.
Thanks, Izzy. So yeah, I think I saw Claire posted in the chat. So there's been lots of discussion in the chat, not just about talk and how powerful e-bikes are, but also about your talk, Izzy. So Claire Rogers from LCC, I don't know if you wanted to add anything before I just open up for any general questions. I've got one to kick us off.
I think Izzy's covered everything beautifully. I can't think of anything to add right now.
Okay, thanks.
Questions?
Thanks, Claire. I think just reflecting in the chat was a bit of discussion about, well, this happens to men too. So would you say, have you done any research that this is significantly worse for women? Or is there a chance that this could just be reflecting what it's like to be a cyclist? And I'm saying that hypothetically, I don't necessarily agree with that view, but I think I'm summarising a view that was in the chat.
Yeah, definitely. So I think absolutely, I think anyone who has cycled on the roads ever has probably experienced, aggression and abuse. And I think that, I think there's a few parts to this. I mean, firstly, there are some studies that suggest that women are targeted more than men. But I think regardless of the reality, I think the perception of danger impacts women more than men. Women are more likely to say that they are, the fear and this kind of safety concerns, discourage them from cycling to a greater extent than men. Obviously, that doesn't, take away from the fact that safety concerns are real for anyone who's on a bike. And I think the last part of it as well was that there is a specifically gendered edge to quite a lot of what we heard, whether that was gendered abuse or whether it was sexual harassment or actually, sexual assault, which again we heard about in our survey.
And is the plan that you'll repeat the survey kind of annually now, so you've got kind of data over time, or what's the plan for the data?
We're all collectively shuddering as you say that.
Definitely TBC. I think we would absolutely love to have the capacity to do that survey every year and do a kind of like longitudinal thing through time. But I think we're obviously supported by the London Cycling Campaign and Claire on this call, but we're a largely kind of volunteer run network, and so resources to do an annual survey would be quite tough. I mean, I would absolutely love to, but I can't necessarily see us signing up for it. Do add to that, Claire, if you've got thoughts.
Sorry if I sounded so horrified. And we're open to everything. We're just considering how the next 3 years is going to look for this campaign. And that idea is not off the table. Probably not an annual survey. One idea we've had is maybe to look at getting local borough groups in London to look at their own local cycle networks and what's working or not working. So there's ideas along those lines.
Thanks, Claire. So I had a question in the chat from Chris. Chris, I don't know if you want to ask your question or I can ask it for you. Chris Knight. I will ask it for him. Chris's question was, should we start reporting intimidation and abuse as hate crimes, as we seem to be a targeted group? And apologies, I realised Chris could be a woman, so apologies, Chris. Should we start reporting intimidation and abuse as hate crimes as we seem to be a targeted group?
I don't know if Chris wants to come in or whether I should just peep in, but I will say that something that was actually raised at our launch event for this report was that misogyny is not a hate crime in the UK. And so I think absolutely one of the things that needs to be better is like the reporting of misogyny, so that it can be tracked and that we can kind of push for better accountability, like from the police. Obviously they came out of our survey very poorly, but I think in terms I don't know if Chris meant about cyclists as a group or women as a group. I'm not sure.
Sorry, I did mean cyclists. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, cool.
And then I've got one more question I'll ask from the chat before I bring the people in who've got their hands up, from Mark Strong. And Mark's question was, do you think the focus on longer routes, even if high quality and needed, rather than short links, is kind of a gendered issue? Does that support, obviously one of your campaign points is for sort of more local routes, and do you think that focus on longer routes has been perhaps a gender issue?
I think I would say yes. I think that those kind of longer, like major routes, for example, as they are in and out of London, they tend to be used more for commuting, which are used more by men, but also by people working as well, which I think is a really important angle to this as well. But yeah, I think I think our survey kind of, one of the things that it touched on was that the local networks are like particularly important for women because they are more likely to be doing journeys in the local area. And again, like the potential for modal shift there is big. But Claire, I saw that you also had your hand up, so.
I can't work out how to put up my little yellow hands in this call. I can usually. Yeah, just following up what Izzy said, with that 86% of trips being local, which was up to 3 miles, that's 86% using all modes of transport. And yet most women were saying, my borough doesn't make it possible for me to do those local trips by bike. So it's, and the reason we even asked that question was because of a brilliant article by Lucy Marstrand-Tausig, who talked about equalities and talks about women needing those local networks to be safe for cycling, and about how data has kind of tended to focus on the commute, which isn't what even men, and not most men, are doing commuting journeys. You know, we need to be looking at those local journeys to the high street and especially to school. And we know that the data for children cycling to school is appalling. So this is where we feel the focus needs to shift to.
Thank you, that's interesting. Right, we've got 3 chaps who've got questions, so I am going to invite anyone who's not a chap to think about whether they want to ask a question. But while that's being thought about, maybe we'll go Bob, Dave, Adam, and maybe we could just take the 3 questions first before Izzy or Claire respond. We'll just go through the questions from each of you first. You're on mute still, Bob.
Sorry, I just wanted to say that I first came across this in the cycling press in the late 80s, so it shows how little has been done. And I'm reading this, I mean, it's revolting, the stories that are being put out. It actually reminds me of what I do with Road Peace when you're talking about the experiences of people who've suffered serious injury or lost loved ones. And all I wanted to push forward is the idea that this is obviously sexism, and women, you know, you can't have a man telling women about that. But the point is, it's facilitated by this extra level of bigotry and prejudice about people who aren't in cars. So there's, you know, what I've called car supremacism. Ian Walker talks about motor normativity, car culture, whatever. And that this is a thing which is facilitating this general problem, and will also get in the way of having local cycle routes, etc. That's all.
Okay, thanks, Bob. More of a comment. Dave and then Adam. If you've got questions, I'll take them kind of together.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'm in Brighton. Izzy, really interesting, especially from a male point of view. I was a bit concerned to flag when you were talking about safety choices for women on their routes, etc. I think groups like Friends of the Earth, or here locally Sussex Wildlife Trust, would be concerned about any extra lighting being taken into what would normally be dark and therefore and presumably natureful areas. I mean, even motion sensor lighting at night would disturb the wildlife.
So, question from Dave about lighting and the kind of conflicts of considerations there, and then Adam.
Yeah, this is more of a data thing, because you're talking about local trips that women do, and they're much more organic. They're doing more trips rather than going to work and back. And if you look at like the PCT.bike tool, it basically has a commuter data set which comes out of census data, and that has got a heavy male bias in responses. So is there, in some ways, the tools that the DFT are providing to councils and to officers are already providing that bias? And yes, there is a school layer, there's a commuter layer, but there doesn't seem to be like a human layer, a local trips to the pharmacy, doctors. Is there anybody working in this space to kind of, you know, get a better balanced, more like almost like, I hate to say it, a 15-minute city sort of approach to a layer into that tool, because that is a decision-making tool that lots of councils are using.
Well, shall I talk about lighting first and then?
Yeah, go.
Yeah, what I was thinking about lighting is I think it's about there being a choice. So I can totally understand the desire to keep, nature-rich areas free of unnecessary lighting, but it can't then be designated a cycle route. And I think that's the problem that we have in London is that, there is various places that are designated as cycleways that actually you really wouldn't want to cycle through. So I think it's about, if it's not going to be in a park, then it needs to be on like a main road alternative. And, there should be, apps that people use need to be, choosing the right routes, and there needs to be kind of better criteria for routes to be designated cycle routes. And yeah, the point about like original data bias, like coming from, being kind of male skewed is really, really interesting. And I don't know, but I'd love to know. Claire, you've got your hand up as well.
Yeah, on that second point, I'm not even sure they collect the school data anymore for PCT. I could be wrong, but I don't think we need like more data. I think if a local council sets out to create let's say local cycle networks, it kind of should be obvious. You take your town centre and you take the places where people need to be, and it's not difficult to work out how to facilitate those journeys by bike. You need no traffic neighbourhoods. You need crossings on what needs doing. So I don't think we need more data. I think we just need to be consciously providing local cycle networks and thinking about those trips to school, as well as all the other journeys people need to do locally. And it isn't just for women. It is for everyone.
Yeah, just to come back on that, even the school commuter data doesn't include universities and colleges. So it's like these massive communities of young people who aren't able to drive or can't afford to, not being modeled or even represented in those decision-making tools. And I think that's, whatever we do, when they build their outline business cases for routes, this stuff is used to justify the routes they're building. So it's a really quite scary thing to be seeing what you're telling us here versus what we're seeing out in the real world.
Kate, please do come in.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on that point about data used to model demand for particular routes. And I think the point is very well made that the propensity to cycle tool, the PCT, uses commute data and has that kind of inherent bias within it as to the sort of routes that are going to come out. And also my understanding is that the school journey to school data isn't collected anymore. The other potential source, but I don't think it is a useful source, is the National Travel Survey, because there isn't enough concentration in a given geographical area to give a significant indication of what the common routes are that are used in that area. So I think, as Claire says, it does come down to more in the way of local knowledge, perhaps, local authorities using some traffic count data and observation, etc. To get it done. There isn't, to my knowledge, and I have had a bit of a look at this, a ready-made data source that could give us that richer picture.
Thanks, Kate. And Mark, you've got your hand up. And Izzy, did we cover the question about lighting? Did we do that one?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Very, very happy if anyone else wants to come in as well. Lots of people from the Women's Network here. So
Mark.
Yeah, just to say, I wrote the cycle data collection strategy for Cycle England 15 years ago, and really Active Travel England ought to do a data collection strategy which covers all the points that we've been raising. I would be delighted for them to do it, and delighted if it wasn't me. So if anyone wants to put that in a pressure to ATE for something they should be doing, because then they can put all these questions. It would then have guidance. It would then cover things like PCT not being fit for purpose anymore and stuff like that. And it would be coherent and national. So there's an ask to ATE.
They've got a head of data as well, haven't they? Isn't it Robin Lovelace?
Not head of data anymore. He's stepped back a bit. He's gone back to his academic work more than his ATE. But he is still involved very much. He's just not as full-time as he was. But somebody there ought to take it. They may be working on it and just not telling anyone.
Thanks, Mark. Right, I can't see more questions. There was a question in the chat from Shane, and I wanted to give Shane a chance to ask it because I wasn't sure if I understood the context, so I didn't want to get it wrong. Shane, are you there? I think I saw you earlier.
Hi, Claire.
Yeah, there you go,
Yeah.
Shane. Over to you.
This is kind of a painful question for me because I'm an advocate for bikeability and for cycle training, and one of the points came up was about women getting more aggressive behavior, or perceived to be getting more aggressive behavior when they're doing things like taking primary. And do we need to be rethinking? Sorry, my lights just went off. Do we need to be rethinking either the content of bikeability or national standard training, or the manner in which it's being taught, or pitching in a particular manner for women cyclists? I don't know where we're going. I just raising the question because I think we need to talk about it. If women are getting aggressive behavior for doing things that they've been taught to do, that's not a good situation for anybody. So I'd throw that one out there.
Anyone have a view on that? Kate, you were going to come in there.
Can I just say that in case Kate hasn't blown her own trumpet, she's also a very valued member of the Women's Network Steering Group. So carry on.
Thank you, Claire. I mean, I think it's a really good point that doing what bikeability says does seem to result in some of the abuse that women and others receive on the road. I guess to me, the solution has to be more not about changing bikeability, but changing the education of other road users. You know, that there are, and it appears to have had some effect, the training of lorry drivers about the awareness of pedestrians and cyclists. And, you know, I think that needs, to me, I'd love to see all of that stuff included within the standard driving test. And you know, that seems to me to be the issue. People just do not understand or think and don't realise that a metre is not a comfortable distance to have a car whiz past you at. And I think that just needs to be educated.
Or is it a comfortable distance to ride from the curb a lot of the time? Claire?
Yeah, I just want to reinforce that point. I think there's a massive amount of ignorance because so many people get this flack for riding in primary position. Again, it's not just women. And there just seems to be, surely there should be some sort of public education campaign like we had for seatbelts. I mean, why isn't it on billboards and television screens? And why did the police not even understand this? I had women told off by a van full of police officers for taking primary position when she was perfectly entitled to do so. And if the police are not getting it, then what hope do we have? So there's a real lack of education and understanding there.
Izzy?
Yeah, just completely agree with that. I just think that the onus cannot be on people who are like cycling right to you know, it has to be on changing driver behavior, which I think is just so bad so much of the time. I think that the highway code changes that came in a couple of years ago, like I don't actually know if there's been any research on how well known they are, but I would be amazed if even like a significant proportion of drivers knew about them. I just think there's been a complete lack of like, yeah, public awareness on how to cycle safely around cyclists. And I think there's kind of examples like here and there of, you know, police forces doing a little bit in different areas, but it's yeah, it's not great. And I think that's why obviously there's a much bigger picture of, you know, 20-mile-an-hour speed limits in built up areas and, you know, more regular driving tests and so on that are outside the focus of the women's campaign, but I think are, you know, definitely things that I think need to happen.
Right, I've realised I mean, that's been a really interesting discussion, and thank you to Izzy and Claire and Kate and others for making the campaign happen and for coming and telling us about it. If you could post in the chat, I think the campaign included an ask to sign the petition, I think. So if you could just make sure that any links you've got are in the chat, people can act on. Now, yeah.
Just to say, you don't need to sign the petition because we were handed it to the mayor on Sunday, and it was 5,000 plus. So thank you to anyone who did sign it.
Apologies, I missed that detail. Yeah. So we'll move on now to, thank you to Izzy and Claire and Kate and others, and we'll move on now to finish the session with Mark, aka Ranty, who's going to finish with cycle traffic signals. And I haven't left you very long, Mark, so I hope you can make it this one
That's
a
okay.
speedy version.
Could somebody allow me to share?
Yes, hang on a moment.
Please.
Give me 1 moment.
And while that's happening, I'm going to talk about cycle traffic signals. It was going to be about traffic islands and cycle signals, but it's grown like topsy, so we'll see where we get to. And let's go, let me full screen. Wonderful. So here we go. Let's have a little blast through. Yes, so cycle traffic signals, and I'm going to start with a bit of a proposition here, or a couple of propositions here. So, and you can disagree with me if you like, and I think I probably need to develop this into a bit of a paper at some point, but I shall read this one out because I think it's quite important. So, traffic signals are motoring infrastructure which provide administrative control in order to manage motor traffic and to give access to where it would be unavailable, if not so controlled. And by that I mean, if you've got a quieter side road or a crossing or something like that, without the signals, those people would never get a chance. On that basis, it's therefore reasonable to expect that people walking, wheeling and cycling won't necessarily follow the rules aimed at drivers, where their energy, time, safety, convenience and comfort, including weather, are adversely impacted. And that is a key challenge for designers and politicians, and probably answers a lot of the questions on, oh, why did cyclists jump red lights we always see? Anyway, that's in mind, and I should develop that thinking further. So cycle signals as a thing have been around for a long time. I haven't quite pinned down the first installation. There's talk around late 70s, but I think definitely by the mid 1980s we've got them. Brought into the traffic signs regulations and general directions in 1994 properly. Here is, it's a bit like Trigger's Broom, because it's a very old junction, but it's had cycle signals forever on the Romford Ring Road. You can just see them there, see little green signals. Layout's pretty horrendous there, but it's just to demonstrate we've had these for a while. We've also got toucan crossings, and it comes from the pun that two can cross. People walking and cycling at the time can cross in the same space. They have their uses, they have the limitations and issues, which I'm quite happy to chat about another time. But just say, yes, we have them. Let's try not use them unless we absolutely have to. Sorry, just contrast here. The crossing lights are on the far side here. Green man and green bike next to each other, if that was green. And then this other example from Bury St Edmunds, we have the push button with the display units just above on the near side. So just a bit of terminology there. We also experimented with signal controlled advanced stop lines. So here's one from the late 1980s. Doesn't exist in that form anymore, unfortunately. It was interesting that the green signal on the left allowed cycles into the ASL, and then presumably the second set of signals here were allowed for people to move off before the traffic. So we were trying stuff ages and ages ago, and like anything in traffic engineering, we've probably done it before, but we've forgotten about it. We now have the modern version of that, really, the cycle gate. Again, something we could have done for a long time. I'd love to know if we've got any sort of the last 10 years of these. But here's an example from the City of London. Quite unusual because cycles enter on the right-hand side rather than the left-hand side. Discussions on Twitter in the week with Camden Cycling Campaign about whether these are good, bad or indifferent. I think they've got value in constrained situations. They are probably a step to a full protected intersection because there's still traffic considerations and the rest of it, especially in London. We've got this whole thing raging about buses, quite a few in that photo there. So maybe interim, maybe stepping stone. They're a tool that have their place. So, oh, I should have said, yes. So we've got this little cycle signals, which you can just see in the distance here, little innovation, literally little innovation here. So the whole idea of low-level cycle signals, again, I was reading about that being thought about in the late 70s. Took until 2013 that we actually got around to testing them in the UK. This is down at the Transport Research Laboratory in Berkshire. Doesn't exist anymore. That layout was set up for TfL's testing, but we now have these in our arsenal. At the same time, we also had some trials there for the 2-stage right turn. So from a cycling point of view, you get a green signal from over my right shoulder as we look at this, pull into this area with this little right turn arrow, and then you look across a junction for another signal going green just before the traffic from the left here is released. Personally, it's okay on a compact junction. If it's a large junction, you do struggle to find your second stage crossing. I'm not a massive fan of these, but again, they have their place. Here's an early release, Cambridge Circus in Soho in London, and you can see there that the red amber is about to turn green, and this will be a few seconds in advance of the main traffic green. Again, the idea of this is that you can get across junction before traffic starts to go through and starts turning and gives those hooking accident risks. Again, they have their place, but it's no substitute for fully protected layouts. I've mentioned this one before on this forum, Wood Street, Cardiff, a fully signal controlled floating bus stop. I don't think we should do that, but I've covered that before, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it here. So we get a bit more contemporary. Here's a nice layout from Birmingham, and you can see on the left-hand side here are the cycle signals. So the full-size cycle signal at the high level, the little cycle signal at the low level. That's kind of what we should be seeing in my view. So here it is from the legislation, Traffic Signs, Regulations and General Directions of 2016 for those keeping count. So diagram 3000, all that is your standard traffic signal. But for cycles, we have two. We have diagram 3002, which is your big traffic signal there, or the low level signal 3000.2a, which is that one there. And so the rules essentially are, it's kind of up to you as a designer. There's lots of considerations here, but for any installation for cycles with a cycle only stage, you have to have at least one cycle signal, but it doesn't matter if it's a big one or a little one. Another example from London, and it's good because as you're approaching the junction, you can see the big signal from a distance, just in terms of how far your eye focuses. And if you happen to be at the stoplight, then you can very easily see the smaller signal, and when that goes green, you don't have to crane your head up to look at that large signal. So I do like that arrangement. Here's a good example of something slightly different. So this has been redesigned since I took this photo, but you can just see the green signal through the trees there. So you've got some good visibility if you're not right up at that stop line. And this particular one, you've actually got a far side cycle green over there. Again, it's useful, depends on the circumstance and the layout. So we can get very flexible. Here's Old Street, fairly recently finished. We've got full-size signal here for cycles going ahead around the corner. I haven't got a little cycle signal there for some reason. On the right-hand side, we've separated out that right turn movement going across the traffic there. But again, you can see the big signal as you approach, the small signal at the cycle stop line. So I think we've got all the tools we really need there. If I head up to Manchester, this I took last week, which was inspiration for writing this up. Transport for Greater Manchester are absolutely obsessed with islands separating cycle directions. We need to remember, we're not designing for people driving here, we're designing for people cycling. And the second you put in that island, it means you're going to start struggling having 2 or 3 people abreast at the stop line. If cycle traffic grows here, then you can really start to reduce your flexibility and access through it. So I don't think we should be doing it. TFGM like to use pairs of low-level signals and not any large signals. Here, I wouldn't have had the island. I would have had the high-level signal with the low-level signal on the left-hand side. Yeah, another example here. It's something for people to cycle into, and it just reduces your flexibility. Let's go to Glasgow. They've actually used low-level cycle signals in pairs on the South City Way, but they haven't got an island between the directions here. So if you're going to use low-level signals in pairs, that's the way to do it. I like to see the high-level signal, as I've kept saying. Here we go. This is what we want to see, what I want to see. High-level signal, low-level signal, nothing sort of blocking the two directions there. Just keeps that flexibility and comfort going for you. Less of an issue on a circulating stage junction, as we've got the Cyclops here in Manchester. Probably less valuable to have the high level signals, because you're going to have to get into that position and closer to the stop line, and then you will see the low level signals there anyway. So again, depends where you are and what you're doing. Waltham Forest klaxon, in this particular example, all they've got here is the high level signals, full size over in the distance there. It's fine, but maybe not quite as intuitive as having everything by the stop line. So it's horses for courses. So depending on what you want to do and where you want to put your signals, it's about visibility, avoiding confusion, legibility, comfort, so people don't have to crane their necks up. Safety, obviously, because although there are administrative controls, there is some safety element in how you design signalised layouts. And there's efficiency, because we have so many posts, so many push buttons, so many signal heads. Sometimes we will make some compromises to be efficient in what we use and where we place it. And that's me for this time.
Thank you, Mark. Massive chat in the chat about that. One question was about what is a good time? What's a good time to allow for the wait that isn't too long, that people don't just break the rules? What's your guidelines?
Oh, I don't know if there is an optimum, because some people may not want to wait 5 seconds, 10 seconds. They might want to just keep going. The problem is, if you look at the Dutch guidance, they pretty much say for every stop somebody makes, the energy needed to get going again is something like 100 meters, 75 to 100 meters. So if you're constantly having to stop, it is energy sapping, and some people, their energy gets sapped far more than others. So that's a consideration. So really, if we can design out having to have signals at all for cycling, that's fantastic. But obviously we have to negotiate large junctions.
Although, as Shane has just reminded me, what about reliable detection systems for bicycles, so they switch automatically?
Yeah, the example I gave of the Cyclops at Chorlton Road, that's got quite clever, because it's starting to look at historic data on flows now. So as they detect a cyclist on the main drag, the signals are green by the time they get to the stop line, if it's working properly.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely.
Right, Jean and George, or Jean or George, whichever one of you would like to come in.
Yes, I was exchanging tweets with Mark about the junction at Southampton Row, which was put in with a cycle gate after a woman had been killed by a HGV turning left. And we did a mini survey there a few days ago, and much to our horror, if any cyclist arrived in the cycle lane when it was on red, absolutely every one of them continued on through, which means they were mixing with the motor vehicles that they're supposed to be being saved from. It's true they don't have to mix with them the rest of the time, so they're slightly better than a normal road. I don't know what you have to say about that, Mark.
Yeah, so for those that don't know the area, we are talking about a cycle gate arrangement. So as a cyclist, you're in the cycle track or the cycle lane, you hit first set of signals, which are either green or red. If they're red, that's probably because general traffic is already moved off. If they're green, you're getting access to the front of the reservoir, as it's known in the guidance. It's big advanced stop lane, stop box. So I think the problem is, from a cycling point of view, that layout is always stop. So wherever you arrive in the traffic cycle, you'll get a red somewhere. And I think partly people are frustrated about having to do that at the first stop line. I guess the issue with that Holborn example is probably there's a lot more people that are very used to cycling in those conditions. Mansell Street that I flashed up, that seems to have reasonably high compliance. There's another one elsewhere that I used a fair bit. That's got pretty high compliance because the traffic blasting through is pretty scary. So I don't know whether that will change at Holborn in time. It'd be interesting to watch, but it's a space issue there. It'd be lovely to have the whole thing completely redesigned with protected infrastructure all the way through, and you get a green wave as a cyclist. So I think time will tell. I think if you're going through the initial red, you're probably aware of what's happening in the stop box ahead of you or the traffic to your right-hand side generally. So maybe people are saying, well, it's okay, nothing's moving, I can advance and take that chance.
The thing is, they aren't stopped. If you go through when it's red, you're by definition of the way the gate works, the other vehicles in there, you're getting mixed up with, aren't you?
Yeah, and I think some people, again, that they're assessing it and they're thinking, well, that's probably okay from the convenience and time point of view. Probably not something I would do personally.
Sorry, we've got 5 minutes left and 3 questions to get through. So
thank you for that, Mark.
Sorry, Jean, to move us on there. So we'll go to Ruth in the questions, and I've got 2 in the chat after Ruth. So if we could try and get all 3, that would be great.
Okay, very quick. Hi, Mark. Thanks for this. 2, one is that in Holland they have the button on a pole, so everyone can reach that pole. It's at waist height and it's further back from the lights. And I just wondered, are we ever going to design that here? And is there an optimum time for early release? Because in my experience on my shopping bike, I've barely turned the pedal and the rest of the traffic is coming anyway. So can highways people adjust that time so that it is longer enough for normal people to be able to get through early?
Second point first, yes. I think the guidance talks about, it might be 4 or 5 seconds, something like that. You do see them turned right down though, Ruth. So yeah, I think you want it a bit longer. But there is guidance on what should be in there. I think it's like pedestrian crossings. Some people need longer to get across. Some people have heavier bikes or whatever. First point, personally, if you've got separate cycle tracks hitting signals, there's no reason why you can't have detectors, so you don't have to push a button at all. Some people like the comfort of seeing the button light up ahead, so they know they've been registered. Yeah, so maybe we can use both, but I do like the ones with detectors, so you don't have to reach over or mess around that way.
Thank you.
Similar question on guidance, Mark, from Kathy in the chat. Kathy, you might want to come in, but basically, how far back should the brake buttons be placed from the road? How far back?
It should be where people can reach them if you can use them. So if you think about the design cycle, or somebody who's sitting at the back of a cargo bike with a big box at the front, if you are using a push button, it's got to be 1.5 meters, 2 meters back from the stop line, because you can't reach it otherwise.
Kathy, is that your experience? 1.5 meters back?
No, it isn't. I mean, a lot of the ones that have been, if you look at the ones in Stevenson Square, they're actually in advance of the white stop line. So how you're supposed to get to them without going over the white stop line on a bike, I really don't know. I mean, the design is just bonkers.
I could have used a photo of that. I took a photo there the other day as well. I'll go back and look at that.
Yeah, I can send you one. Yeah, I can send you one.
Yeah, you need the push button needs to be well in advance of the stop line, because lots of people won't reach it.
Yeah.
Right, and then the last one I was going to put to you, Mark, was a kind of behaviour that's somebody's flagged. Here we go, Brenda. What do you think of the differing cycling signals along Lee Bridge Road? Although I think this happens in many places, where a few cyclists switch from road to cycle track to get the best advantage from signals. Some signals favour motors and some cycles. I've seen this happening in a route that I use. Is that just bad design? Is that just opportunism? What's the?
I think it goes back to my original proposition that if people were worried about time, safety, convenience, all the things, some people will do it. Depends where you are. I mean, if you use a route regularly, you get to learn how the signals are set up. So sometimes you might actually switch something because you know you're going to reach the next set of signals for traffic and you'll get the green there. So as much as I'd like to say, yes, we should massively favour walking and cycling a lot more in junctions, for example, you've got a certain cycle time for a junction of a certain size. And if you give to one group, you take from another. And especially if you've got bus operators breathing down your neck and other things like that. So yes, if you see, in inverted commas, bad behaviour, it's probably because of the design, but the design has to respond to a lot more things than just people cycling. I'll try to be diplomatic there.
Yeah, what you're saying.
But behaviour is coming from design every time.
Okay, well, thanks everyone. I think we'll draw it to close there. Brilliant session. Thanks to Izzy and the others from London Cycle Campaign. Thanks to Mark for really interesting insight as ever on that particular topic. One thing I've been asked to mention before we finish tonight is just a reminder about our donations link, which if you get our email is in there. We are run by Active Travel Cafes, run by volunteers. We do just need a few pennies to keep the lights on, to keep the various tech things going. So if you do like what we do and do fancy chipping us in a few quid, then that's always gratefully received. And if not now, then later in the year or after payday or whenever's convenient for you. Then just to flag up, next week we have got Jill Borchards and Tina Walker from Cycling UK in Stevenage, and they're going to talk about their approach to election campaigning. Obviously, we're about to enter the kind of pre-election period for the local elections and mayoral election if you have one. So they're going to share how they approach that. And we've also got Dr. Louise Platt from Manchester Metropolitan University, who's going to talk about her research into walking with babies, which I'm very interested in that. And so do join us if you can next week. If not, you know where we are. We'll be back every Tuesday, except for when we're on a break. And thanks again to everyone for joining tonight.